The High Council chamber of Aethelis Prime was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance. Its vaulted ceilings, ribbed with glowing sight-conductive quartz, were designed to capture every stray thought and amplify it into a grand, collective hum. To the Ethel race, this was harmony. To me, it was a goddamn riot inside a wind tunnel. I stood at the edge of the violet light, my boots polished to a mirror finish, hands clasped behind the small of my back in a perfect parade rest. I had worn this uniform for 12 years, 4 months and 9 days. It was a simple charcoal fabric, reinforced with lead mesh and kinetic padding, a stark contrast to the flowing, iridescent silks of the high archons. Archon Zakal stood at the central dais, his elongated fingers dancing over a holographic display that flickered with malignant shades of crimson. He was a tall, reed-thin being, with skin the color of a bruised plum, and eyes that held the cold calculation of an accountant measuring a death toll. "The data is unequivocal," Zakal announced, his voice smooth as oil on silk. "Empress Lyraea's psionic cortex is showing signs of accelerated degradation. The cumulative neural necrosis has reached 42%. If the source of this static is not removed, our sovereign will suffer permanent cognitive collapse within 180 days. I didn't blink. I didn't look at the charts. I looked only at her. Empress Lyraea sat upon the obsidian throne, her silhouette sharp against the sprawling view of the capital city below. Her skin was a uniform, ethereal pale purple, flawless and shimmering under the spire's artificial suns. Long obsidian black hair flowed naturally over her shoulders, with a few stray locks framing her face, nearly hiding the delicate pointed tips of her ears. She looked like a goddess carved from starlight, but I could see the fracture lines. Her fingers were white-knuckled against the armrests. Her jaw was set so tight I feared the bone might snap. She was drowning in the thoughts of the 12 counselors in the room, and for the first time in over a decade, my presence wasn't enough to keep the water out. "Human," Zakal turned toward me, his eyes narrowing. "Vane Thorn, you were hired as a specialized dampener, a void to grant Her Majesty a respite from the collective. But the medical board has concluded that your primitive human biology generates a dissonant field. You are not a shield, Thorn. You are a poison." I felt the surface thoughts of the counselors wash over me like dirty dishwater. Unnatural, blunt tool, a relic of the Terran Wars. They hated me because I was a blind spot in their world. They couldn't read me, couldn't influence me, and most importantly, they couldn't see what I was doing for her. "Do you deny these findings, Ranger?" Zakal pressed. I cleared my throat. The sound was harsh in the vaulted room. "I'm a soldier, Archon, not a neurologist. If your boxes say I'm the problem, then I'm the problem. I don't argue with the math." It was a lie. I knew the necrosis wasn't coming from me. I could feel the loom, the great psychic network of the Empire, throbbing with a new, aggressive frequency. Something was pushing the ethel mind toward a breaking point, and Zakal wanted the only man who could sense the distortion out of the way. Lyraea finally looked up. Her ocean blue eyes were clouded with pain, searching mine for something. A protest, a sign of defiance, a reason to tell them all to go to the void. But I knew the game. If I stayed, Zakal would use the medical emergency to strip her of her regency. If I left, she would be alone in the storm, but she would still be Empress. "Vane," she whispered. Her voice was the only beautiful thing in this crystalline tomb. "Is it true? Are you hurting me?" I looked at her, truly looked at her, memorizing the way the light caught the silver embroidery of her gown, a garment that was more a web of sensors than clothing, barely covering the intricate patterns of her bioluminescent skin. "The Archon says so, ma'am," I said, my voice steady. "And the Archon is a very smart man. I've served 12 years. It's been a good run. If my time's up, I'm ready to punch out." Zakal's lips curled into a thin, triumphant smile. He tapped a command on his wrist link. "The termination order is prepared. You will surrender your palace credentials, your kinetic disruptor, and your rank insignia immediately. You are to be off-world or moved to the low districts within 6 hours. You are officially zero-opted from the Ethelgard service." I walked forward. Each step felt like I was walking through deep mud. I reached for the silver pin on my collar, the stylized eagle of the Terran Rangers. I unclipped it and placed it on the cold glass of the council table. Next came the heavy, burnished brass key to the Empress's private inner sanctum. "Simon," Lirea said, her voice cracking. She used my old squad call sign, the one only she knew. "Wait, don't, Lirea," I said softly, breaking protocol one last time. "The mission's over. Time to bug out." I turned my back on the throne. I walked toward the massive arched doors. As I crossed the threshold, the palace's environmental systems hissed, and the heavy thud of the closing doors echoed like a coffin lid slamming shut. The moment the seal was complete, I felt the null field around me snap. It didn't hurt me, I was the source, but I knew what it did to the room I left behind. Without my presence to absorb the psychic backwash, every thought in that chamber would have hit the Empress like a physical blow. I didn't look back. I walked down the long, lonely corridors of the celestial spire, past the guards who looked through me as if I were already a ghost. 12 years of silence ended with a blue signature on a digital screen. I had 6 hours to become a ghost in a city of 100 million telepaths. Erexion was the belly of the beast. If the celestial spire was the shining crown of Athelas Prime, then Erexion was the rusted, oil-stained boots. It was a vertical slum built into the foundations of the ancient hive city, a place where the air tasted of recycled oxygen and desperation. I had been here for 72 hours. I sat in a corner booth of a dive bar called the Rusty Valve, nursing a glass of synthetic whiskey that tasted like industrial cleaner. My new home was a 6 by 9 foot hab unit 3 floors up, and my wardrobe consisted of a single civilian jacket and the cargo pants I'd managed to keep. The bar was crowded with the dregs of a dozen systems, grimy miners, ship scrappers, and low-level stim dealers. To them, I was just another washed-up human vet. They didn't see the way I watched the door. They didn't notice the way I kept my back to the wall. "You look like you're waiting for a war to start, big man," the bartender said, wiping a glass with a rag that was arguably dirtier than the glass itself. He was a Jora, a multi-armed reptilian species known for their mechanical aptitude and lack of personal boundaries. "Already fought my wars, Jax," I grumbled, taking a slow sip of the rot gut. "Just looking for a quiet spot to rust." "Quiet? In Erexion?" Jax laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "You picked the wrong rock, pal. The loom is screaming tonight. Even a flat scan like me can feel the itch." I narrowed my eyes. "Screaming how?" "Dunno. Some kind of pulse coming from the spire. The ethals are twitchy. Saw 2 of them have a full-blown neural seizure in the plaza this morning. Word on the street is the Empress has gone dark, locked herself in the high sanctuary, and won't see anyone." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Locked herself in. She wasn't locked in. She was trapped. Without me to act as her memory sink, the sheer volume of a world's collective grief was likely tearing her apart. Suddenly, the door to the bar kicked open. 2 figures in sleek, obsidian-colored tactical gear stepped in. They weren't palace guards. These were Zakal's personal enforcers, specialized telepathic hunters. They wore helmets with glowing violet visors that amplified their tracking abilities. The bar went silent. The telepathic weight they projected was heavy, a suffocating pressure that made the patrons look down at their drinks. "Human," the lead enforcer said, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "Vane Thorn, you are under arrest for the theft of Imperial property." I didn't move. I kept my hand on my glass. "I don't have anything that belongs to the Archon, boys. Surrendered my kit at the gate. Check the logs." "We're not talking about gear, Thorn," the second one growled, stepping forward. He drew a shock baton that hummed with 3,000 volts of neural interference energy. "You're a walking security hazard. The Archon wants you in a containment cell where you can't interfere with the loom. Is that right?" I stood up slowly. The height difference was negligible, but I had 40 pounds of Terran muscle on them. "Tell Zakal if he wants to chat, he can send a formal invitation. I'm done with the palace life." The lead enforcer didn't argue. He lunged. It was a rookie mistake. Ethals relied too much on their ability to read an opponent's intent. They expected to feel my muscles tensing, to hear the roar of my adrenaline in the psychic ether. But they got nothing. To them, I was a hole in the universe. I sidestepped the baton, the ozone from the discharge stinging my nose. I grabbed the enforcer's wrist, twisted it until the bone groaned, and drove my palm into the base of his helmet. The visor shattered, and the man went down with a muffled groan. The second one tried to trigger a fear spike, a concentrated burst of psychic terror. I felt a slight tingle at the back of my brain, like a static shock from a carpet. But that was it. I closed the distance before he could recalibrate. A knee to the gut, followed by a sharp elbow to the temple. He folded like a house of cards. "Jax," I said, looking at the stunned bartender, "put the repairs on my tab." "You gotta bug out, Thorn," Jax whispered, his four hands trembling. "Those guys have backup. They'll glass this whole block to get to you." "I know." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the back exit. I moved through the winding alleys of Eryxion, my boots splashing through puddles of neon-tinted runoff. I needed to get to the lower transport hubs, to vanish into the deep crust mines where even the loom couldn't reach. But as I turned the corner into a deserted loading dock, I saw a figure huddled in the shadows. She was wearing a tattered, hooded cloak that did little to hide the pale purple shimmer of her skin. Her obsidian hair was a tangled mess, and she was clutching her head, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. "Lirea?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. She looked up, and my breath hitched. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nose bleeding a slow, shimmering violet. She looked like she'd been through a meat grinder. "Vane," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. The silence. I couldn't find the silence. She collapsed forward. I caught her, pulling her small, shivering frame against my chest. The moment she entered my null field, I felt her whole body go limp. The tension fled from her muscles as if a physical weight had been lifted. "You came for me," I murmured, brushing the hair from her face. "I had to," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. They're turning the loom into a weapon, Vane. Zakal is using the amplifier to override us. I'm the only one left who can see it because I remember what it's like to be quiet." "Easy, Bug," I said, using the nickname I hadn't used in years. "I've got you. We're going to ground." I lifted her up, her weight almost nothing compared to the burden she'd been carrying. In the distance, I heard the whine of more enforcer transports. The hunt was on, and this time, the stakes weren't just my pension. 12 years of service had been a warm-up. The real fight was just starting. "Vane," she murmured against my shoulder, her grip on my jacket tightening. "Don't let them take the quiet away again." "Not a chance, Lirea," I promised, stepping into the darkness. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The descent into the deep crust of Athelas Prime was less like a journey and more like a slow, claustrophobic burial. We left the neon-stained atmosphere of Eryxion behind, trading the hum of predatory gang mines for the grinding, rhythmic groan of planetary-scale machinery. Down here, in the substrata of the hive city, the air was thick with the scent of oxidized iron and the peculiar dry bitterness of a dying ecosystem. Lirea was a dead weight in my arms, her breathing shallow and irregular. Even in the dampening bubble of my null field, the psychic tremors from the surface were reaching her. I could feel them too, not as voices, but as a low-frequency vibration in the marrow of my bones. The loom was reaching out, searching, like a blind god sweeping its fingers across a dark room. "Stay with me, Bug," I whispered, shifting her weight. I had to navigate the rusted skeleton of a decommissioned ventilation shaft. One wrong step on the corroded plating, and we dropped 500 meters into a geothermal cooling vat. I can hear the center, Vane," she murmured, her eyes half open and glazed with a shimmering violet film. "It's not just noise anymore. It's an order. Zakal, he's singing to them. He's telling them that the silence is a lie." "Zakal's a politician, Lirea. Politicians are professional liars. Just keep your focus on my heartbeat. Keep it steady." I moved with the practiced silence of a man who had spent 3 years behind enemy lines in the serious conflict. My boots, reinforced with sound-dampening polymer, found purchase on the narrow ridges of the shaft. I was 42 years old, and my knees were already reminding me that I wasn't the 20-year-old grunt who had enlisted to see the stars. I had a kinetic shield generator strapped to my hip, 2 standard-issue human-made plasma pistols, and a single thermal grenade. It wasn't much for a war against an empire, but it was more than I had 12 hours ago. The deeper we went, the more the architecture changed. The elegant, flowing lines of the ethel buildings were replaced by the utilitarian, brutalist designs of the original human colonial era. Before the ethels had arrived and integrated our world into their harmonious collective, humanity had been a race of builders and miners. We had carved this world out of rock with sheer, stubborn will. Now these lower levels were a graveyard of that ambition. I finally found what I was looking for, a service hatch marked with the faded, white-painted insignia of the old Terran Engineering Corps. I kicked it open, the screech of metal on metal echoing in the silence. We emerged into a maintenance hub that looked like it hadn't seen a living soul in 50 years. Dust lay an inch thick over rows of dormant computer terminals. In the center of the room sat a massive, circular ventilation fan, its blades frozen in mid-rotation like the petals of a dead flower. I laid Larea down on a pile of discarded thermal blankets in the corner of the room. I checked the perimeter, planting a small proximity sensor at the hatch and another at the far end of the hub. My hands were steady, but the sink was starting to overflow. That was the secret they didn't teach the counselors. Being a null wasn't a passive trait, it was an active, biological vacuum. For 12 years, I hadn't just been blocking the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm the Empress. I had been absorbing them. Every stray bit of court gossip, every hidden desire, every flash of hatred from the Archons, it all went into me. I was a mental landfill, a reservoir for the psychic waste of an entire palace. Usually I could purge it during my off hours, but 72 hours in Orixian without the palace's specialized meditation chambers had left me bloated with the echoes of other people's lives. "Vane!" Larea called out, her voice stronger now that we were nearly 4 kilometers beneath the spire. "Your feel, it's different." I sat down against a rusted support pillar about 10 feet away from her. "The sink's full, ma'am. I'm leaking." "Don't call me that," she said, sitting up slowly. She pulled the hood of her cloak back, revealing the intricate bioluminescent patterns on her neck. They were pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light. "You're hurting. I can see the gray in your thoughts, even through the dampening." "I'm fine. Just need to vent." I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the thousands of fragmented memories inside me and pushing them into the dark corners of my mind. Archon Varric's greed, the head chef's secret affair, the existential dread of a third-class scribe. It was a cacophony that lived in the back of my skull. "Why didn't you tell me?" Larea asked. She crawled across the dusty floor until she was sitting right beside me. I tried to pull away, to maintain the distance, but she grabbed my arm. Her skin was cool, almost like silk-covered ice. 12 years, Vane. You were my anchor, but you were drowning the whole time. That was the job, Larea. I was the sanctuary guard. You can't have a sanctuary if the walls are talking. The medical board, they weren't entirely lying, were they? Her eyes searched mine, filled with a terrifyingly clear-eyed guilt. The necrosis, the degradation. It wasn't me being poisoned. It was you. I looked away, focusing on a flickering light on the far wall. Human brains aren't meant to be psychic sponges. My neural pathways are a bit frayed around the edges. But it's not necrosis. It's just wear and tear. Like an old engine that's been run too hot for too long. "You sacrificed your mind for my comfort," she whispered. "I sacrificed my mind for the only person in this galaxy who looked at me like a man instead of a biological anomaly." I snapped back. The edge in my voice surprised both of us. The sink was definitely leaking. "You think I give a damn about the pension or the Archons? I've seen what the loom does to people. It turns them into a hive. It strips away the things that make them individuals. But you fought it. You wanted to be your own person. I just held the door open so you could do that." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of 12 years of unspoken truths. Down here in the dark heart of the planet, the hierarchy of Empress and Guard didn't exist. We were just 2 ghosts in the machine. Suddenly, my proximity sensor chirped a low, warning tone. "Company?" Larea asked, her hand instinctively going to the small, ornate dagger she kept hidden in her gown. "Too fast for enforcers," I said, drawing my plasma pistol and checking the charge. and too quiet for the locals. I moved to the hatch, peering through the thermal optics. A single figure was approaching. Not an ethel. Too short, too broad. The heat signature was human, but it was distorted, flickering with an unnatural frequency. "Sledge," I muttered, lowering my weapon slightly. "Who's Sledge?" Larea asked, standing up behind me. "A ghost from my past. If it's actually him, he's about 15 years overdue for a KIA report." I opened the hatch just as the figure reached it. A man stood there, or what was left of a man. He was huge, built like a tectonic plate, but his left arm and leg had been replaced by crude industrial-grade cybernetics. His face was a map of scars, and one eye had been replaced by a glowing red optical sensor that whirred as it focused on me. "Thorn," the man growled. His voice sounded like two grinding stones. "Heard you got zero-opted. Thought you'd have the sense to head for the stars." "Good to see you too, Sledge. This is Larea." Sledge's red eye flickered over the Empress. He didn't bow. He didn't even look impressed. "The big boss. Nice dress. Pity about the neighborhood." "Jax sent you?" I asked. "Jax is dead, Vane," Sledge said flatly. "Enforcers glassed the rusty valve about 20 minutes after you bugged out. They're not playing by the rules anymore. Zikhal has authorized extreme reconciliation protocols. Anyone who's talked to you is a target." The news of Jax's death hit me like a physical punch. He was a good lizard. He'd given me free drinks and bad advice for 3 years. He didn't deserve to be a footnote in Zikhal's power play. "The loom," Larea said, stepping forward. "What is he doing to it, Sledge?" The big man looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. "He's built an architect, ma'am. A massive subspace resonator right in the heart of the spire. He's not just amplifying thoughts anymore. He's broadcasting them. He's creating a forced consensus. If you don't think like him, the noise becomes a physical weapon. I've seen 300 miners go catatonic in the last hour because they tried to remember their own names. He's enslaving them," Larea whispered, her skin turning a deeper, bruised shade of purple. "He's perfecting them in his mind," Sledge replied. "But there's a problem. The architect needs a stable anchor to broadcast from. Someone with a royal-grade psionic cortex. He tried to use the council, but they weren't strong enough. They're burning out." "He needs me," Larea realized. "And he knows you're with the Null," Sledge said, turning back to me. "Vane, you're the only thing that can get close to that resonator without your brain turning into soup. But you can't do it alone. The deep crust is crawling with shadow guards. They're faster than the palace flunkies you're used to." "We're not going to hide," I said, holstering my pistol. "We're going back up." "With what army?" Sledge asked, a cynical grin twisting his scarred face. "I don't need an army. I need a distraction, and I need a way to bypass the spire's external shields." "The old rail lines," Sledge suggested, his red eye whirring. "They run through the foundations. Hard vacuum seals. No air. No heat. Even the shadow guards don't go there. But it's a 3-day trek through the grinders." "We'll make it in 2, I said. I looked at Larea. She was staring at her hands, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin flickering. She was terrified, and she had every right to be. But when she looked up at me, the fear was buried beneath a layer of that royal steel I'd admired for 12 years. "If we do this, Vane," she said, "if we stop Zikhal, the silence goes away for everyone. The loom will be broken. My people, they'll be alone in their own heads for the first time in 10,000 years." "Maybe that's what they need," I said. "A little peace and quiet." Sledge grunted, checking the massive kinetic hammer strapped to his back. "Let's move. The air in here is starting to taste like enforcer boots." We stepped out into the dark, echoing tunnels of the substrata. The hunt was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming the right to be silent. And as I walked behind Larea, her light guiding us through the gloom, I realized that the sink didn't feel so heavy anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just holding a door. I was walking through it. The grinders were a nightmare of industrial history. Thousands of years of discarded technology, crushed by the sheer weight of the city above, had formed a labyrinth of compressed steel and jagged glass. Every step was a gamble. Every breath was a luxury. We had been walking for 6 hours. The air was thin, barely enough to support human life, but Sledge and I were used to the strain. Larea, however, was struggling. Her species evolved for the high-oxygen, climate-controlled environments of the floating spires, not the suffocating depths of the mantelworks. 5-minute comms check, Sledge called out, his red eye scanning the darkness ahead. Vane, the heat sigs are increasing. We're getting close to the geothermal vents. Copy that. Larea, how are you holding up? She leaned against a wall of fused circuit boards, her face pale. I feel heavy, not just the air. The loom is pressing against the edges of your field. It's like a hand trying to crush a bubble. I moved closer to her, expanding the null field to its maximum radius. It felt like stretching a muscle that was already torn. A sharp, stinging pain flared behind my eyes, and for a second, I saw a flash of someone else's memory, a child crying on a planet I'd never visited. I shook it off. The resonance is getting stronger, I said. Zikal is ramping up the broadcast. He's trying to find the resonant frequency of the planetary crust itself. If he hits it, he can turn the whole world into a giant antenna. He's insane, Sledge muttered, his mechanical leg clanking on the metal floor. He's going to shatter the loom entirely. No, Larea said, her voice strained. He's not trying to break it. He's trying to consolidate it. In the ancient texts, there was a concept called the one mind, a state where every ethel thought with a single will. It was abandoned because it led to the Great Burn. Half the population died from neural feedback because they couldn't handle the emotional weight of 1 billion lives. And Zikal thinks he's the one who can drive the bus, I added. Typical. We reached a massive circular chamber that had once been a water purification plant. The floor was covered in a foot of stagnant, oily water, and the walls were lined with rows of silent, towering filters. In the center of the room stood an old human-built statue, a woman holding a torch, her face worn away by centuries of condensation. The Gray Sanctuary, Sledge announced. Old miners used to come here to talk without the foreman listening. The lead lining in the walls is 3 feet thick. It's the only place in the deep crust where the loom is truly silent, even without a null. I felt the shift immediately. The low-frequency vibration in my bones vanished. The pressure in my skull eased, and the sink felt suddenly, blissfully dormant. Larea stood in the center of the room, her arms held out at her sides, her head tilted back. Silence, she whispered. Real silence. Not just the void you create, Vane. This is peace. I sat down on a dry ledge watching her. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly relaxed. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin weren't pulsing. They were glowing with a soft, steady light, like moonlight on water. You should sleep, I said. We have a long climb ahead of us. In a moment, she walked over and sat down beside me. Sledge is scouting the exit. We're alone. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Being this close to her without the constant psychic static of the palace felt strange. It felt dangerous. Vane, she said, looking at me. When Zikal showed those medical reports, I almost believed him. Not because I thought you were a poison, but because I saw how tired you were. I thought that by letting you go, I was giving you your life back. You were, I said. I just didn't want it. Why? You're a hero of the Terran Wars. You have 12 medals. You could have lived anywhere. Why stay in a room with a woman whose very existence was slowly destroying your mind? I looked at the statue in the center of the room. The war didn't leave me with much, Larea. When I rotated out of the Ghost Walkers, I didn't have a home to go back to. Earth is a museum world, a place for tourists and history buffs. My family, they were gone. My squad was gone. I was just a weapon with no one to point me. I rubbed the scarred skin on my forearm. Then I got the palace assignment. I thought it would be easy. Stand around, look tough, collect a paycheck. But then I met you. You were the Empress of 1 billion souls, surrounded by people who worshipped you, and yet you were the most alone person I'd ever seen. You were screaming in a room full of people and no one was listening. You listened, she said softly. I didn't have a choice. I was built to listen to the things everyone else ignores. I realized that if I left, the screaming would never stop for you. I couldn't live with that. Being your anchor, it gave me a mission that actually meant something. It wasn't about borders or resources or politics. It was about making sure one person didn't have to suffer. Larea reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm now. That's a heavy burden for one man to carry, Vane, to be the sanctuary for an entire soul. It's the only thing I've ever done that I'm proud of. We sat there for a long time, the only sound the rhythmic dripping of water from the ceiling. It was a human moment, simple and fragile, in a world built on psychic complexity. Suddenly, Sledge returned, his red eye flashing. We've got a problem. The rail lines are blocked. Shadow guards have set up a perimeter at the primary junction. They must have predicted we'd head for the foundations. How many, I asked, my soldier mind snapping back into focus. A dozen, maybe more. And they've got a wraith with them. I felt a chill. Wraiths were ethel assassins who had been surgically modified to interface directly with the loom. They didn't just read thoughts. They could project themselves into your mind, turning your own memories against you. A wraith can see through my field if I'm not careful, I said. They don't look for the mind. They look for the void. Then we don't go through the junction, Larea said, standing up. We go through the core. Sledge stared at her. The geothermal core? Ma'am, the temperature in there is over 400 degrees. Even with environmental suits, we'd be cooked in 10 minutes. There's an old coolant bypass, she said, her voice gaining that imperial authority. My ancestors built it during the first colonization. It's a direct line to the Spire's primary reactor. It's narrow and it hasn't been mapped in centuries, but it's the one place Zakal's network can't reach. The magnetic interference from the core will scramble his sensors. It's a suicide run, Sledge grunted. It's the only run we have, I said, standing up and grabbing my gear. Larea, you're sure about this bypass? I've studied the architectural archives for 12 years, Vane. I had a lot of time to read while you were standing guard. It's there. We just have to find the entrance. Then let's bug out, I said, checking the charge on my plasma pistols. Sledge, take point. I'll bring up the rear with the Empress. As we left the gray sanctuary, the silence followed us for a few more seconds before the low, grinding hum of the deep crust returned. But the weight didn't feel so heavy anymore. I looked at Larea, her obsidian hair shimmering in the dark, and I knew that even if we didn't make it to the surface, we had already found the one thing Zakal couldn't control. We had each other, and in a galaxy full of noise, that was the only silence that mattered. Vane, Larea whispered as we stepped into the heat of the geothermal tunnels. Yeah, thank you for staying, for all of it. The job's not done yet, Larea. Let's finish it. We moved into the darkness, 3 ghosts against an empire, fueled by the stubborn human belief that some things are worth the sacrifice, even if the world never hears your name. The grinders groaned above us, the spire loomed ahead, and the loom waited with its billion voices. But for now, the only thing that mattered was the steady rhythm of our boots on the cold, hard rock. The path ahead was fire and steel, but as I watched Larea's light pulse in the gloom, I knew I would follow her into the heart of the sun, if that's what it took to keep her quiet. Stay close, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The void is with us. Always, she replied, and we stepped into the heat. The heat hit us like a physical wall as we breached the secondary containment seal. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the pressure. We were deep enough now that the air felt thick, oily, and heavy with the scent of sulfur. Environmental seal's at 90%, I reported, checking the gauge on Larea's suit. I had found an old engineer's rig for her in the sanctuary, a bulky orange and gray suit that looked ridiculous over her regal frame, but it was the only thing that would keep her skin from blistering in the core. Keep your internal cooling on high, Bug. We can't afford a heat sink failure. I'm fine, Vane, she said, her voice muffled by the helmet's comms. The noise. It's even quieter here. The magnetic fields are like a blanket. Yeah, a blanket made of lava, Sledge grumbled. He was ahead of us, his mechanical arm whirring as he used a heavy plasma cutter to clear a path through a tangle of fused pipes. Vane, the floor's soft here. Watch your step. One wrong move, and you're going for a swim in the mantle. I grabbed Larea's hand, guiding her over a gap in the walkway. Below us, a river of molten rock flowed in a channel of reinforced carbon steel, its orange glow the only light in the cavern. The sheer scale of the engineering was staggering. The early human colonists had built this world to last 1,000 generations, and yet we were using it as a backdoor to a coup. Sledge, I called out. How far to the coolant bypass? About 500 meters. But the pressure's rising. The cooling system's been running at overcapacity since Zikal fired up that architect. The heat sink for the spire is right above us, and it's dumping enough thermal energy to melt a moon. As we moved, I felt the sink in my mind begin to vibrate again. It wasn't the loom this time. It was the nodes of the architect. I could feel them pulsating through the rock, a rhythmic driving force that felt like a sledgehammer hitting a velvet curtain. Obey, unity. The silence is death. The words weren't mine. They were Zakal's, broadcasted with enough power to override the basic survival instincts of any Ethel who heard them. "He's getting stronger," Larea whispered, her voice trembling. "He's not just broadcasting thoughts anymore. He's broadcasting himself, his ego. He wants everyone to be a reflection of him." "Not on my watch," I said, my jaw tightening. We reached a massive lead-shielded door marked Access Tower 7. Sledge jammed his kinetic hammer into the seal and pulled. The metal groaned, protesting the intrusion, before finally sliding open with a hiss of escaping gas. Inside was a vertical shaft that stretched upward into infinity. Rows of glowing blue pipes ran along the walls, carrying supercooled liquid toward the spire. In the center was a narrow maintenance ladder that looked like it was held together by rust and prayers. "This is it," Larea said. "The bypass. It goes directly into the spire's primary reactor room. From there, it's only 3 floors to the architect's control center." 3 floors of shadow guards, Sledge reminded us, and a whole lot of angry Ethels who think Zikal is the Messiah. "They won't see us coming," I said. "Not in the void." I started the climb first, my boots echoing on the metal rungs. Larea was right behind me, then Sledge. The heat was still intense, but the cooling pipes provided a strange, icy counterpoint to the geothermal roar of the core. As we climbed, I looked down at Larea. Her helmet was clear and I could see her eyes. They were focused, determined, and for the first time in 12 years, they weren't clouded by the pain of a billion voices. She was free, and she was fighting to keep that freedom for everyone else. I realized then that she was right. I was her anchor, but she was my compass. Without her, I was just a man with a hole in his head, wandering through a galaxy of noise. With her, I was something more. I was a protector. I was a sanctuary. "Vane," she said, looking up at me, "I can feel your thoughts. You're happy." "I'm a soldier on a suicide mission, Bug," I replied with a grin. "This is as happy as it gets." The climb was grueling, a test of physical and mental endurance that pushed us to our limits. But as we reached the upper levels of the shaft, the blue pipes began to hum with a different frequency. The reactor was close. "Wait," Sledge hissed, his red eye freezing. "I hear something." "Above us?" I asked, reaching for my pistol. "No. Everywhere." Suddenly, the blue pipes exploded, not with pressure, but with light. A blinding violet radiance filled the shaft, and a psychic scream of absolute, unadulterated agony, tore through our minds. "Zikal!" Larea choked out, collapsing against the ladder. He's starting the Great Burn. He's pushing too hard." The loom was no longer a network, it was a fire, and we were right in the heart of the furnace. I grabbed Larea, pulling her toward me, expanding my null field until it was a blinding, white-hot shield against the violet roar. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It felt like my brain was being peeled apart, layer by layer, as the sink overflowed and the psychic energy of a world poured into me. "Hold on," I roared, my voice lost in the psychic storm. "Sledge! Get to the hatch! Move!" The big man scrambled upward, his mechanical limbs smoking as the energy surged through his cybernetics. I followed, carrying Larea with a strength I didn't know I had. We reached the top hatch just as the shaft began to disintegrate. Sledge kicked the door open, and we tumbled into the sterile, white-lit halls of the reactor room. The silence hit us like a physical blow. The lead shielding of the reactor was thick enough to block the broadcast, at least for now. I lay on the floor, gasping for air, my mind a fractured mess of other people's screams. Larea crawled over to me, her hands shaking as she pulled my helmet off. "Vane! Vane, look at me!" I looked at her, but I couldn't see her. All I could see were 1,000 lives, 1,000 deaths, 1,000 voices all crying out for an end to the noise. "I've got it," I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of an ocean. I've got the noise, Larea. It's safe now. It's all in the void. She held me, her tears falling onto my face. Not like this. Not like this, Vane. The mission, I coughed, a metallic taste in my mouth. The architect. We have to finish it. I stood up, my legs shaking. I was broken, my mind was a ruin, but the silence was still there. I was the anchor, and as long as I was standing, the storm couldn't reach her. Let's go, I said, the words a jagged edge in the quiet. Time to turn off the lights. We moved toward the final floors, 3 ghosts in a world of screaming light, heading for the heart of the noise. The end was coming, and I was the only one who could hear it. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was the silence. The air in the upper levels of the celestial spire was supposed to taste like mountain lilies and artificial morning dew. Instead, it tasted like burning copper and the metallic tang of fear. As we stepped out from the reactor's access shaft, the sheer opulence of the high-ethel district felt like a mockery. The walls were made of living, translucent coral that usually pulsed with a gentle, soothing amber light. Now they were strobing a frantic, jagged violet, reflecting the madness of the loom. We were in the promenade of the Seven Suns, a sprawling garden that connected the administrative wings to the royal residence. In the before times, this was where the elite of the empire would gather to exchange high-level telepathic poetry and negotiate trade treaties in a cloud of serene harmony. Now it was a tomb of the living. Check your corners, I rasped, my voice sounding like it was being squeezed through a handful of gravel. The sink in my head was thrumming so hard my vision was beginning to vignette into a hazy gray. Sledge, take the left flank. Stay in the shadow of the planters. Copy that, Vane. I'm picking up multiple heat sigs, but they're not moving, Sledge whispered. His red optical sensor whirred as he scanned the lush, alien foliage. Looks like they've gone full-on brain burn. We moved forward, my null field acting as a bubble of sanity in a world that had lost its mind. As we cleared a grove of weeping, crystalline trees, we saw them. At least 40 ethel nobles and their servants were scattered across the promenade. Some were curled into fetal positions, their hands clawing at the stone floors until their fingernails were gone. Others sat perfectly upright, their eyes wide and staring, blood trickling from their ears in slow, rhythmic drips. They're still connected, Larea whispered, her voice a fragile thread of grief. She tried to step outside the radius of my field to reach a fallen child, but I caught her arm, my grip perhaps tighter than I intended. Don't, I said, my tone a flat, military snap. If you touch them, you're just opening a door for Zikal to walk right into your skull. You can't help them if you're catatonic, ma'am. They're my people, Vane, she said, her ocean blue eyes filling with tears that shimmered with the violet light of the atmosphere. I can feel the echo of their agony even through you. It's like a million bells ringing at once, and every one of them is cracked. I know it's a rough ride, Bug, but we've got to stay on mission, Sledge said, his heavy boots crushing a fallen piece of decorative quartz. Zikal is using their brains as signal boosters. Every one of these poor saps is just a node in his relay now. If we don't shut down the architect, this neural fry is going to be permanent. I looked at the nobles. I didn't feel the poetry or the harmony they used to brag about. I just felt the waste. 12 years I'd spent protecting the sanctity of a mind, and Zikal had turned an entire civilization into a screaming circuit board in less than 72 hours. Vane, Larea said, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. The noise, it's changing. It's getting rhythmic. She was right. The violet strobe of the walls was settling into a heavy, thumping pulse. It felt like the heartbeat of a monster. Consensus pulse, I muttered, my soldier instincts screaming a warning. I'd seen it once on the fringes of the Terran Ethel War. The Ethel military used it to synchronize their shock troops, turning 100 individuals into a single mindless weapon. Sledge, check fire. We've got incoming. From the far end of the promenade, a squad of shadow guards emerged. They didn't walk. They drifted in a terrifyingly perfect synchronization. Their armor was made of non-reflective black glass, and their eyes were glowing with a uniform, solid purple. There were 8 of them, and they were moving as one. Drop them before they can link up, Sledge roared, raising his kinetic hammer. Negative, I shouted. Stay in the field. If you step out, they'll scramble your motor cortex before you can pull the trigger. The shadow guards raised their hands in unison. A ripple went through the air, a physical distortion of psionic energy. The weeping trees shattered, crystalline shards flying toward us like shrapnel. I threw myself in front of Larea, expanding the null field to its breaking point. The shards hit the edge of my field and dropped as if they'd hit a brick wall, the kinetic energy simply vanishing as the psychic intent driving them was neutralized. But the strain was immense. It felt like a hot iron was being pressed into the base of my skull. Vane! Your nose! Larea cried. I wiped my upper lip, my fingers coming away red. Human blood, dark and thick. The sink was overflowing. The necrosis Zakal had lied about was becoming a reality, but it wasn't a disease. It was a pressure failure. Sledge, bug out to the service corridor, now! On it! Sledge fired a burst from his wrist-mounted flechette launcher, the metal spikes whistling through the air. One guard went down, his synchronization broken, but the other 7 simply adjusted their formation without missing a beat. It was like fighting a hydra. We scrambled toward a hidden access panel behind a statue of the first emperor. Sledge ripped the door off its hinges with his mechanical arm, and we dove into the narrow, dark passage. I slammed the door shut, leaning my weight against it as the psychic pulse from the guards hammered against the other side. The silence of the service tunnel was a different kind of horror. It was damp, cramped, and smelled of the heavy lubricants used for the palace's lift engines. I slumped against the wall, my breathing coming in ragged hitches. Vane, sit down, Larea commanded. She didn't ask this time. She took the first aid kit from my belt and pulled out a neural stabilizer. You're taking too much. You're trying to absorb the whole world. I have to, I gasped, the world spinning in nauseating circles. If I don't, it gets to you. And if it gets to you, we lose. This is the cost, isn't it? She looked at me, her face illuminated by the bioluminescent mold growing on the tunnel walls. This is what you've been doing for 12 years, taking the things that would destroy me and burying them inside yourself. I'm an anchor, Larea, I said, trying to steady my hands. An anchor's job is to sit in the mud so the ship doesn't drift. It's not supposed to be pretty. But you're not a tool, Vane. You're a man. You have a soul that wasn't built for this kind of filth. Her voice was fierce, echoing in the narrow space. Zakal thinks we are all just parts of a machine. He thinks I am a battery and you are a filter. If we act like that, then he's already won. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the Empress. But I also saw the girl who had once asked me if I ever missed the smell of rain on Earth. What do you want me to do, Larea? I can't just turn it off. Share it, she said. I barked a laugh that turned into a cough. Share it? Larea, if I let even a fraction of what's in my head into yours, you'll be screaming until the sun goes out. Not the noise, Vane, the weight. She reached out and touched my temples, her fingers cool against my burning skin. I've spent my whole life being told that my power is a burden, that I must rule because I can hear everyone. But what if the point isn't to hear everyone? What if the point is to listen to one person? I felt a strange sensation, a cooling ripple that didn't come from my own null field. She was reaching out, not to the loom, but to me. She wasn't trying to read my thoughts. She was trying to stabilize my neural rhythm. Easy, bug, I whispered, though I didn't pull away. We are 2,000 meters from the architect's core, Sledge said, his voice low and tactical as he stood guard at the end of the tunnel. And the energy readings are off the charts. If we're going to do this, we need to move. The shadow guards are already rerouting. They'll be on us in 3 minutes. He's right, I said, standing up. My head was still thumping, but the sharpness of the pain had dulled. Larea, stay close. Sledge, you have the heavy ordnance. If we see a guard, don't wait for a psychic handshake. Just put them down. Copy that. Let's go kick some Archon ass. We moved deeper into the spire's guts, heading for the central pillar. The humanistic theme was no longer an abstract concept. It was a physical weight, a debt of 12 years that was finally coming due. I had always thought that being an anchor meant being alone. I was beginning to realize that an anchor is only useful if there's a chain connecting it to something worth saving, and Larea was worth everything. The central pillar of the spire was a hollow shaft of white marble and psionic conductive glass, rising over 5 kilometers from the planetary crust to the vacuum of space. Inside this shaft sat the architect, a series of rotating, crystalline rings that generated the consensus field. It looked like the eye of a god, spinning with a silent, terrifying grace. As we emerged onto the observation gantry, the sheer scale of the machine took my breath away. It was humming with a sound that wasn't sound, a vibration that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The violet light was so intense it felt like it was staining my skin. There, Larea pointed, the primary frequency modulator. If we can disrupt the rotation of the third ring, the whole consensus field will collapse into white noise. And the people? I asked. They'll be disoriented. Some might have neural scars, but they'll be free. Sledge, you see the struts? I pointed to the massive supports holding the rings in place. We need to plant the thermal charges there. If we blow the supports, the rings will grind themselves to dust. On it! Cover me! Sledge started to move along the narrow gantry, his heavy frame surprisingly agile in the low gravity of the upper spire. But I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Zakal wouldn't leave his masterpiece unguarded. The air in front of us suddenly curdled. It didn't ripple. It folded, like a piece of paper being creased by an invisible hand. A figure emerged from the distortion. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in robes made of shadows and silver thread. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless mask of polished obsidian. A wraith. The moment it appeared, my null field felt like it was being flayed. The wraith didn't broadcast thoughts. It reflected them. It was a mirror of the void, a predator designed specifically to hunt things like me. Vain thorn, a voice echoed in my head. It wasn't a voice I heard with my ears. It was a voice that resonated in my very bones. The man who thinks silence is a sanctuary. Let us see what you have buried in your garden. I raised my plasma pistol, but the wraith was already moving. It didn't run. It flickered, appearing 10 feet to the left, then 5 feet behind us. It was faster than human reflexes could track. Sledge! Charges! Now! I roared, firing a blind burst into the shadows. Sledge reached the first strut, but the wraith flickered into existence right beside him. With a casual wave of its hand, it sent Sledge flying across the gantry. The big man hit a railing with a sickening crunch of metal and bone, his mechanical leg throwing off sparks as he slid toward the edge. Sledge! I'm good, Sledge gasped, though he didn't get up. Just give me a second. The wraith turned its faceless mask toward me and Larea. Empress, you have spent 12 years hiding behind this hollow shell of a man. Do you truly believe that a flat scan's ignorance can protect you from the truth of your own kind? His ignorance is more honorable than your insight, Wraith, Larea said, her voice trembling but resolute. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. The wraith laughed, a sound like glass breaking in a vacuum. Is it? Let us look at the sanctuary he has built for you. Suddenly, the sink in my head erupted. I didn't just feel the memories. I lived them. I was back in the serious conflict, watching my squad being vaporized by a plasma barrage. I was in the palace kitchens, feeling the cook's crushing loneliness. I was in the council chamber, feeling Zakal's cold, parasitic ambition. It was too much. The walls of the void were crumbling. I fell to my knees, my hands clawing at my head, a scream tearing its way out of my throat. Vane! No! Larea was beside me, her hands on my shoulders, but she was being swept away by the tide too. The wraith was using my own absorbed trauma as a weapon against her. She was seeing every horror I had hidden from her for 12 years. She saw the blood. She saw the grief. She saw the sheer, soul-crushing weight of the things I had carried so she could smile for the diplomats. This is your anchor, Empress, the wraith hissed. A man filled with the rotting corpses of 1,000 broken thoughts. Is this the peace you desired? To live atop a mountain of buried screams? I looked up through the haze of agony. Larea was staring at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. I expected her to pull away. I expected her to see me as the poison Zakal had called me. 12 years of service, and it was all going to end with her hating me for the very things I did to protect her. But she didn't pull away. She knelt in the oily dust of the gantry and pulled my head against her chest. She wrapped her arms around me, her bioluminescent skin glowing with a blinding, pure white light. "It's okay, Vane," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm listening." "Larea, get back. It'll kill you," I choked out. "No, I spent 12 years letting you carry my world. It's time I carried yours." She did something then that the Ethel guarded as their most sacred secret. She didn't just listen, she harmonized. She took the chaotic, jagged frequencies of my sync and began to weave them into a melody. She wasn't blocking the pain. She was acknowledging it, validating it, and in doing so, she was stripping it of its power. The wraith shrieked. It was a mirror, and it thrived on reflection. By harmonizing with the pain instead of reflecting it, Larea was denying the wraith its fuel. The shadowy figure began to flicker violently, its robes fraying into gray mist. "Impossible!" the wraith roared. "You cannot! The weight! It should shatter you!" "I'm not alone," Larea said, her voice echoing with a power that shook the gantry. "I have my anchor, and he has me." The light from her skin expanded into a brilliant sphere of white, pushing back the violet gloom. The wraith let out a final, thin scream before it was consumed by the radiance, its faceless mask shattering into 1,000 pieces of obsidian dust. The silence that followed was absolute. I slumped against her, my mind feeling lighter than it had in a decade. The sink wasn't empty, but it was organized. The screams were just memories now. The ghosts had been laid to rest. "Vane?" She pulled back, looking at me. She looked older, her face lined with the things she had seen in my head, but she looked stronger too. "Can you stand?" "Yeah," I said, wiping the blood from my eyes. I looked over at Sledge. The big man was dragging himself back toward the struts, his mechanical legs sparking but functional. "3 minutes, boys," Sledge called out, his voice a gritty rasp. "I've got the primary charge set. Get clear." "We're not getting clear, Sledge," I said, looking at the spinning rings of the architect. "We're going to the control hub. We need to make sure this thing stays dead." "What about Zakal?" Larea asked. "He'll be at the center of the eye," I said, checking my plasma pistol, waiting for his crown. We moved toward the final bridge, the humanistic theme now fully tested. I had learned that being an anchor wasn't about being a shield. It was about being a bridge. It wasn't about suffering in silence. It was about finding someone who could hear the silence and still want to stand beside you. 12 years, I muttered as we stepped onto the bridge. "I guess I'm finally off the clock, ma'am." "Don't you dare," she said, her hand finding mine and squeezing it tight. "The pension is going to be extraordinary." We stepped into the heart of the eye, ready to face the man who thought he could own the soul of a world. The violet light was fading, replaced by the steady, human glow of our own determination. The turning point had passed. The cost had been paid in blood and memories. Now it was time to see if the silence we had fought for was worth the noise we had made. "Ready, Bug?" I asked. "Ready, Vane." We charged. The control hub was a cathedral of light and terror. It sat at the very center of the architect, a suspended platform of white-hot crystal that seemed to vibrate with the collective subconscious of the entire Ethel race. At the center of the platform stood Zakal. He no longer looked like an accountant. He looked like an apex predator. His robes were flowing in a wind that didn't exist, and his skin was glowing with a terrifying, sickly violet radiance. He was plugged into the machine, crystalline cables snaking from the floor into the ports at the base of his skull. "Empress," Zakal said, his voice echoing through the chamber like a landslide. "And the human. I should have killed you both in the council chamber. My sentimentality for the old guard was a tactical error." "It wasn't sentimentality, Zakal," I said, raising my pistol. "It was arrogance. You thought a human was beneath your notice. You thought a void was just an empty space." "Is it not?" Zakal laughed, and the sound made the crystals around us vibrate. "Look at you, Thorn. You are a dying man. Your neural pathways are scorched. Your mind is a graveyard. And for what? For a queen who will outlive you by 300 years? For a people who will forget your name before your body is cold?" "I didn't do it for the name, Archon," I said. "I did it for the silence." "Silence is for the dead," Zakal roared. He raised his hand and a wave of pure psychic force slammed into us. It was stronger than anything the Shadow Guards had thrown. It felt like being hit by a freight train of concentrated ego. My null field buckled, the white light flickering. I fell to one knee, the stone of the platform cracking under the pressure. "Vayne!" Larea shouted, her own power flaring to support mine. "You cannot stop the one mind." Zakal's eyes were entirely violet now. No pupils, no iris, just infinite screaming light. "I am the consensus. I am the empire. Every ethel thought, every dream, every fear, it all flows through me." "Then you're going to feel all of it, Zakal," Larea said. She did something then that made my heart stop. She let go of my hand. She stepped out from behind my shield and walked toward the center of the platform, her own bioluminescence flaring with a brilliance that made Zakal's light look dim. "What are you doing?" Zakal hissed, his robes whipping around him. "I am the Empress," she said, her voice calm and terrifying. "The daughter of the morning star, and I am tired of you talking in my head." She reached out and grabbed the crystalline cables connecting Zakal to the architect. The feedback was instantaneous. A pillar of white and violet light erupted from the center of the platform, reaching toward the vaulted ceiling of the spire. Larea screamed, her body arching as the energy of the entire loom poured through her. But she wasn't absorbing it. She was redirecting it. "She's grounding it," Sledge shouted from the gantry, his red eye wide. "She's using herself as a lightning rod. Vayne, if she keeps this up, she'll burn out her entire cortex." "No!" I roared. I lunged forward, ignoring the psychic pressure that felt like it was crushing my internal organs. I reached the center of the pillar and grabbed Larea's waist, pulling her back. But she wouldn't budge. I have to show them. The way out," she gasped, blood pouring from her eyes now. "Not alone," I shouted. I grabbed the cables too. The sink didn't just overflow, it shattered. I wasn't Vayne Thorn anymore. I was 100 million people. I was a child crying. I was a soldier dying. I was a lover laughing. I was the Archon's greed and the servant's hope. It was a tidal wave of humanity in Ethelkind, all of it crashing into my soul. And in that moment, I realized the final truth. The void wasn't a hole. It was a foundation. I took all that energy, all that noise, and I didn't try to block it. I didn't try to bury it. I just held it. I became the anchor for the entire race. For 1 second, I was the silence at the heart of the storm. Zakal's eyes went wide. "No, you're a human. You're a flat scan. You can't." "I'm a ranger, you son of a bitch," I whispered. "And I'm zero-opting you." I pulled. The cables snapped. The rings of the architect ground to a screeching halt, sparks flying like falling stars. The consensus field didn't just collapse, it imploded. The last thing I saw was Zakal's face as his own ego, stripped of the loom's support, collapsed in on itself. Then there was a blinding flash of white, and the world went quiet. Truly, finally, perfectly quiet. The silence following the collapse of the architect was not the peaceful respite I had spent 12 years cultivating. It was a vacuum, a terrifying airless expanse where the soul of a planet had once thrived. In the immediate wake of the cables snapping, the world felt as though it had been plunged into a deep-sea trench. Every ethel in the spire, from the high-born counselors to the lowly scullery maids, had just been ripped from a collective dream and slammed into the cold reality of their own singular existence. I lay on the fractured crystal of the control platform, my lungs burning as if I'd inhaled a handful of needles. My vision was a flickering kaleidoscope of violet and gray. I couldn't feel my legs. I wasn't even sure I had legs anymore. My entire nervous system was a scorched map of overloaded synapses, 100 million echoes still vibrating in the hollowed-out shell of my brain. "Vayne? Vayne, talk to me, you stubborn bastard!" Sledge's voice sounded like it was coming from the other side of a kilometer of heavy lead. I felt a massive, calloused hand on my shoulder, shaking me with a desperation that bypassed military discipline. I blinked, the world slowly settling into a jagged, painful focus. Sledge was leaning over me, his red optical sensor spinning wildly, his face caked in soot and shimmering ethel blood. Is she?" I choked out, the words tasting like copper and bile. "I'm here, Vayne." Larea was kneeling on my other side. She had stripped off the bulky engineer's helmet, and her face was a mask of beautiful, terrifying grief. The violet light was gone from her skin, replaced by a dull, ashen gray. She looked fragile, like a piece of glass that had survived a hurricane only to be shattered by a whisper. Her ocean blue eyes were clear, but they were haunted. For the first time in 10,000 years, an Empress of Aethelis was truly, fundamentally alone in her own head. The architect. Is it dark? I rasped. It's scrap metal, Thorn, Sledge grunted, helping me into a sitting position. The whole central pillar is starting to buckle. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this bird decides to take a dive into the deep crust. We need to bug out now. I looked around the chamber. Zakal was gone. There was no body, only a charred silhouette on the floor where he had been standing when the feedback hit. He hadn't just died. He had been erased by the very consensus he tried to enslave. The crystalline rings of the machine were still, glowing with a faint, dying luminescence like the embers of a forest fire. The guards, Larea whispered, looking toward the gantry. I can't hear them. Vane, the silence. It's too big. It's like a hole in the universe. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and found her hand. The sync in my mind was gone, shattered along with the machine, but the connection, the 12 years of shared breaths and unspoken fears, remained. I wasn't her anchor because of a biological fluke anymore. I was her anchor because I knew exactly how much the silence hurt before you learned to live in it. That's because you're actually thinking for yourself, Bug, I said, trying to force a smile through the pain. It's scary as hell, I know, but it's yours. Nobody else gets to vote in there anymore. We've got company, Sledge roared, raising his kinetic hammer. From the shadows of the crumbling gantry, the shadow guards were rising, but they weren't moving in synchronization anymore. They were stumbling, their black glass armor cracked, their purple eyes flickering with a frantic, confused light. Without the architect's broadcast, they were like puppets whose strings had been cut and then tangled. They were terrified, and a terrified Ethel with high-grade combat training was more dangerous than a controlled one. Their brains scrambled, Sledge muttered, stepping in front of us. They don't know who's a friend and who's a target. They're just lashing out at anything that doesn't feel like the hive. One of the guards let out a raw, physical scream, a sound I hadn't heard an Ethel make in years. He lunged toward us, his hands glowing with a jagged, unstable psionic energy. He wasn't aiming, he was just exploding. Stay behind me, I barked, dragging Larea up. My legs felt like they were made of wet cardboard, but the old ranger instincts were hardwired. I didn't need a psychic connection to know a threat. I raised my plasma pistol and fired a 3-round burst. The guard's shield flickered and died, the unstable energy of his own mind shorting out the suit's electronics. He hit the floor hard and didn't move. We can't kill them all, Vane, Larea said, her voice gaining a sliver of that old authority. They're not enemies. They're victims. They're suffering from total sensory deprivation. I'm not looking to rack up a body count, ma'am, but I'm not letting them turn us into paste either, Sledge growled, pairing a psychic strike with his hammer's disruptor field. We need a path to the secondary lift tubes. The promenade, Larea realized. If we can reach the gardens, I can use the emergency broadcast beacons. They're low power, short range, but I can use them to send a stabilizing frequency, a mental lighthouse to guide them back to shore. You'll have to drop your shield, I warned. You'll be exposed. I have you, don't I? She looked at me, and in that moment, the humanistic theme we had been building for 12 years finally moved from a quiet understanding to a desperate active reality. She wasn't asking for a guard. She was asking for a partner. Sledge, clear a path. We're heading for the gardens. We moved through the ruins of the control hub like 3 survivors of a shipwreck. The spire was groaning, the massive marble pillars cracking under the tectonic stress. Every few seconds, a psychic tremor would roll through the air, a ghost pulse from the dying loom. It felt like a static shock to me, but for Larea, it was a staggering blow. We reached the promenade of the 7 suns just as the artificial suns began to flicker and die. The garden was a scene from a nightmare. The nobles we had seen earlier were starting to wake up, but they were lost. They were crawling over each other, their minds projecting a chaotic, discordant roar of, Who am I? And where is the light? It's a madhouse, Sledge whispered, his red eye whirring in the gloom. 1 billion years of evolution, and they've forgotten how to be individuals in 10 minutes. They didn't forget, Larea said, stepping toward the central fountain. They were never allowed to learn. We kept them in the light so long they've forgotten that the dark is where you find your own flame. She climbed onto the edge of the fountain, her crystalline dress torn, her skin gray and tired. I stood at the base, my back to her, my pistols held at the low ready. I was the circle of silence in which she could work. I was the vacuum that allowed her to find her voice. Larea, do it now, I said. The shadow guards are closing in on the gantry. She closed her eyes. I felt her power flare, not the aggressive, dominating roar of Zekal, but a soft, rhythmic pulse. It was the anchor frequency I had taught her in the Gray Sanctuary. It wasn't an order. It was a heartbeat. I am here. You are here. We are one, but we are many. The effect was instantaneous. The chaotic screaming in the promenade subsided. The nobles stopped crawling, their heads lifting toward the fountain. The shadow guards at the edge of the garden lowered their hands, the glow in their eyes stabilizing from a jagged violet to a soft, manageable indigo. But the cost was immediate. Larea's skin began to shimmer with a terrifying intensity. She was bridging the gap for all of them, using her own mind as a temporary loom to prevent a total social collapse. She was doing exactly what I had done for 12 years. She was becoming the sink. Vane, she gasped, her eyes flying open. They were leaking violet light now. There's so much. I can't hold all of them. I turned, stepping onto the fountain ledge beside her. I didn't think about protocol. I didn't think about the fact that I was a human and she was an empress. I just wrapped my arms around her and pulled her back into the void. Give it to me, I commanded. The whole load, Larea. Send it into the sink. It'll kill you. You're already fried. I'm a Terran Ranger, bug. We're built for high-altitude garbage. I roared, my own mind opening wide. Dump the files, now. She did. The weight hit me like a planetary collision. I didn't hear voices. I felt the raw, unrefined pressure of 1,000 souls trying to find their way home. It was pain. It was hope. It was the sheer, terrifying beauty of being alive and alone. I felt my neural pathways beginning to melt, the necrosis finally claiming its due. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 100 beats a minute, 120, 140. Vane! I could feel Sledge's hand on my boot, trying to ground me. I could feel Larea's tears on my neck, but I could also feel the planet. For one glorious, agonizing second, I wasn't just Vane Thorn. I was the silence that allowed 1 billion voices to finally hear themselves. Then the fountain exploded, not with water, but with a final, blinding burst of indigo light. The stabilizing frequency surged outward, riding the wave of my null field, reaching every corner of the palace. The shadow guards slumped to their knees. The nobles breathed. The chaos broke. I fell backward, the world going black before I even hit the water. The last thing I heard wasn't a psychic scream. It wasn't an order or a consensus. It was a single human-made sound. The sound of one person crying for another. Waking up felt like being reassembled from 1 billion shards of cold glass. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the artificial lilies of the spire, but the sharp, clean scent of ozone and something earthy, like wet stone after a storm. The second thing I noticed was the silence. It was perfect. It was a silence that didn't need to be guarded. It was a silence that had been earned. I opened my eyes. I was lying on a cot in a temporary medical pavilion. Above me, the sky of Aethelus Prime was a bruised indigo, the 7 suns beginning to rise over the horizon in a slow, majestic arc. We were in the low plaza, far beneath the ruins of the spire. I could see the great pillar in the distance, its upper 3 kilometers gone, a jagged stump of marble against the morning clouds. About time you rejoined the living, Flatscan? Sledge was sitting on a crate next to my cot. His mechanical arm was missing its outer plating, and his red eye was flickering with a dim, tired light. He was nursing a cup of something that smelled like actual, honest-to-God coffee. How long? I croaked, my throat feeling like I'd swallowed a bowl of sand. 2 days, Sledge said, handing me a canteen. The spire came down about 20 minutes after we got you out. Larea carried you half the way herself. Wouldn't let the medics touch you until she'd verified your neural readings personally. I took a shaky sip of water. The people? It's a mess, but it's a human mess, Sledge shrugged. Government's in shambles. The loom is gone for good. People are having to learn how to use their mouths to talk again. It's noisy, it's disorganized, and everyone's got a headache that could kill an ox, but nobody's a puppet anymore. Zekal? Dust in the wind. His followers are either in the stockade or hiding in the grinders. Most of them are too busy trying to remember their own names to start a counter-revolution. I tried to sit up, but my body protested with a wave of white-hot agony. My nerves were still raw, the sink having been permanently cauterized by the final discharge. I felt empty. Not a void, just a man. She's in the high pavilion, Sledge said, seeing my eyes wander. Meeting with the Provisional Council. They wanted to appoint a new Archon regent. She told them to go to the void. Said the Ethels are done with Archons? I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with duty. Good for her. Vane? The voice came from the entrance of the pavilion. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Larea stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing an Empress's gown. She was wearing a simple, practical tunic of dark blue wool, her obsidian hair tied back in a messy braid. She looked exhausted, her skin still a pale, tired gray, but she looked real. She looked like a woman who had finally found herself in the wreckage of a goddess. Sledge stood up, his mechanical joints creaking. I'll go see if I can find some more of this coffee. Try not to break anything while I'm gone. He clumped out of the pavilion, leaving us alone in the quiet of the morning. Larea walked over and sat on the edge of my cot. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just took my hand, her fingers interlacing with mine. You're a hole in the universe again, Vane, she whispered. The medics said the discharge burned out your neural receptors. You can't absorb anymore. I heard, I said. Guess I'm officially retired. No more sink, no more sanctuary. No, she said, looking me in the eyes. Her ocean blue irises were clear, the violet haze gone forever. Not a sanctuary, a partner. You aren't my guard anymore, Vane. You haven't been for a long time. Larea, I'm a 42-year-old human with fried nerves and no pension. You're the leader of a world that's trying to figure out how to breathe. You don't need a broken-down ranger hanging around your neck. I don't need an anchor, she agreed, leaning forward until our foreheads touched. I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet in the promenade. But I want the man who stood in the mud so I could find them. I want the silence we built together. The humanistic theme had reached its culmination. It wasn't about the sacrifice of the many for the few, or the few for the many. It was about the simple, profound truth that we are not meant to carry the weight of the world alone. We are anchors for each other, and in that shared weight, we find our freedom. I don't know how to be a civilian, Larea, I admitted, my voice cracking. I've spent 24 years of my life in one uniform or another. I don't know what to do with the quiet. Then we'll learn together, she said. The council wants to rebuild the spire. I told them no. We're going to build a city on the ground. A city with walls that don't talk. A city where every person has the right to be silent. Sounds like a plan. She leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a royal gesture. It wasn't a psychic harmonization. It was just a woman kissing a man, a simple physical connection that meant more than any billion-voice consensus ever could. It tasted of salt and hope. 12 years, I murmured against her lips. I think I'm finally starting to like the silence. It's about time, she smiled. Outside the pavilion, the 7 suns rose higher, illuminating a world that was broken, chaotic, and beautiful. In the ruins of the spire, the old empire was dead. But here on the ground, in the quiet space between a man and a woman, something new was beginning. The void was no longer an empty space. It was a home. Sledge walked back in a few minutes later, holding 2 steaming mugs. He looked at us, his red eye whirring, then looked at the floor. Coffee's ready, he said, his voice a gritty rumble. And the Provisional Council is waiting for a statement, Larea. They want to know what the new law of the land is. Larea stood up, her hand still holding mine. She looked at Sledge, then out at the rising suns. Tell them the first law is simple, she said. Everyone gets to be quiet, and anyone who tries to start a riot in someone else's head has to answer to my husband." Sledge grinned, a terrifying sight, but a genuine one. "Copy that, ma'am. I'll go tell the brass." As he walked away, I looked at Laria. "Husband? I don't remember seeing that in the job description. Consider it a contract extension, Thorne," she said, her eyes sparkling with a light that had nothing to do with psionics. 12 years was just the probationary period. The real service starts now. "Yes, ma'am," I said, pulling her back down for one more moment of perfect, earned silence. "I'm ready for the mission." The spire was a jagged memory. The loom was a ghost. But as the morning light filled the pavilion, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a war to start. I was just living, and that was the greatest victory of all. The first thing I learned about a world without a psychic network was that it was incredibly loud in all the wrong ways. For 12 years, my life had been defined by a curated silence, a bubble of nothingness I maintained so one woman could breathe. Now that bubble was gone, and the planet was exhaling. Outside the recovery ward in the low districts, the air was a chaotic symphony of physical sound. I heard the rhythmic thumping of jackhammers as crews cleared the debris of the fallen spire. I heard the shouting of street vendors selling actual, physical newspapers, a medium that had been obsolete for a millennium. Most of all, I heard the voices. Raw, unrefined, and often terrified, the Ethel people were learning that to be understood, they actually had to open their mouths. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my hands. They didn't shake anymore, but they felt heavy, like they were made of lead in old memories. The sink in my mind was a scarred wasteland. The doctors, human and Ethel, working in an uneasy newfound partnership, called it neural desensitization. I called it a quiet house with all the lights turned off. I could no longer sense the presence of others. I was a true flat scan now, as blind to the psychic world as a rock in a river. "You're brooding again, Vane. It's a bad look for a guy who just saved a civilization." Sledge clumped into the room, his mechanical leg making a steady, reassuring clack hiss on the linoleum. He was carrying a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee. He'd traded his tactical vest for a flannel shirt that looked like it had survived a planetary bombardment, and his red optical eye was glowing with a soft, stable light. "Not brooding, Sledge," I said, reaching for a cup. "Just adjusting to the radio silence. It's weird. I keep waiting for the backwash to hit me, but there's nothing. Just me." "Welcome to the club, pal," Sledge grunted, pulling up a chair that groaned under his weight. "That's what being a person feels like. It's just you and the voices in your own head. Sucks at first, but you get used to the company. The Ethels are having a harder time of it. Saw a high counselor crying in the plaza because he couldn't remember his wife's favorite color and couldn't just reach into her brain to find it. "They'll learn," I said, the bitter warmth of the coffee hitting my tongue. "How's the dust-off going at the spire?" "It's foobar, honestly," Sledge said, using the old military slang for a situation beyond all recognition. "We've pulled out about 300 survivors from the lower levels. The shadow guards are mostly in custody. Larea's got them in a deprogramming camp in the Gray Sanctuary. They're being taught how to think without a signal. Some are taking to it, some are just gone. Brains like scrambled eggs." I leaned back, closing my eyes. I didn't need a psychic connection to feel the weight of Jax's death or the thousands of others who hadn't made it through the collapse. The cost of freedom was a ledger that never quite balanced out. "Zakal's remnants are still trying to cause trouble in the upper sectors," Sledge continued, his tone turning sharp and tactical. "A few of his true believers think they can rebuild the architect. I've got a squad of Terran grunts and some Ethel volunteers keeping them from getting organized. We're calling ourselves the Void Watch. Fitting, don't you think? Keep an eye on them, Sledge. Arrogance like Zakal's doesn't die just because the machine broke. It just goes underground." The door to the ward opened, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a psychic shift. I was blind to that now, but a presence. Larea walked in, accompanied by 2 aides who looked like they were struggling to keep up with her pace. She was wearing her dark blue wool tunic, her obsidian hair falling naturally over her shoulders. A few locks strayed across her pale purple cheek, and her ears were visible, the delicate points trembling slightly as she scanned the room. "Give us the room, boys," she said. It wasn't an Empress's command, but the words of a woman who had spent 48 hours straight trying to hold a world together. Sledge stood up, gave me a quick nod, and clanked out, ushered the aides along with him. The door clicked shut, leaving us in a silence that felt heavy with 12 years of history. "You look better," she said, walking over to my bed. She reached out and touched my forehead. Her hand was cool, and for the first time I didn't feel the sink reach out to meet her. I just felt her skin against mine. Simple. Physical. "I feel like a rusted-out transport, but the engine's still turning," I said. "How are the meetings going?" "The Provisional Council is a nightmare, Vane. They spend 6 hours arguing about who gets to sit where because they can't sense each other's status anymore. I had to tell Archon Varric's successor to shut his mouth, or I'd personally escort him to the Erection slums so he could learn some real manners." I chuckled, the sound catching in my chest. "You always did have a way with words, Bug." She sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders dropping as she finally allowed the mask of leadership to slip. "They want a new spire. They want to rebuild the loom. They're afraid, Vane. They feel naked. They feel like they've lost their souls." "They haven't lost their souls. They've just finally found their privacy. It's a scary thing, knowing nobody else knows what you're thinking. It means you have to be honest." Larea looked at me, her ocean blue eyes searching mine. "I can't hear you anymore. Not even a whisper. It's like looking into a dark room. Does it scare you?" "No," she said, leaning forward until our noses almost touched. "It fascinates me. I have to look at your face. I have to listen to the tone of your voice. I have to guess. It's like a game where the rules change every second. I think I love it. It's called a conversation, Larea. Humans have been doing it for a long time. Usually involves a lot of misunderstandings and occasionally a bar fight, but it's ours." She smiled and the light in her skin seemed to settle into a soft, contented glow. "The doctors say your neural damage is permanent. You'll never be a Null again. You'll never be able to sense the loom, even if we did rebuild it." "Best news I've heard in 20 years, I said. "I'm done being an anchor for a billion people. I think I've got enough work just being an anchor for one." We spent the afternoon talking, really talking. She told me about her childhood before the loom became so loud, about her mother's secret garden, and about the fear she felt the first time she realized she couldn't turn the voices off. I told her about the rain in Seattle, the smell of old books, and the way the stars looked from the cockpit of a Ranger dropship. We were learning the geography of each other's hearts without the shortcut of telepathy. As the suns began to set, casting long indigo shadows across the ward, I realized that the sink hadn't been a gift. It had been a barrier. By trying to protect her from the world, I had accidentally protected her from me. And by trying to be her God-given shield, I had forgotten how to be her friend. "Vane," she said, as she prepared to leave for another late-night council session, "Sledge mentioned the Void Watch. He wants you to consult on the security protocols for the new city. He thinks we need someone who knows how to spot a lie the old-fashioned way." "I'll think about it, but I have a condition." "And what is that?" "I want a house with a porch," I said, "on the ground, somewhere with actual dirt and trees that don't glow. And I want a dog. A big, loud, messy dog that doesn't have a single psychic bone in its body." Larea laughed, a sound that was purely her own, unamplified and beautiful. "I think we can arrange that, but you'll have to teach me how to feed it." "It's a deal." She kissed me, a quick lingering touch of lips against skin, and then she was gone, her presence leaving a lingering warmth in the room. I lay back in the dark, listening to the jackhammers and the sirens and the distant muffled sound of a world being reborn. The weight of 12 years was gone. The noise was gone. I was just a man in a bed, in a city of strangers, with a whole lot of nothing in my head. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next mission. I was just waiting for tomorrow. 1 year later, the city of New Athelis didn't look like a spire. It looked like a garden. We had built it into the fertile plains of the southern continent, far away from the crystalline ruins of the old capital. The buildings were low, made of warm wood and local stone, designed to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. There were no site-conductive quartz ceilings here. There were only windows vast and clear that let in the natural light of the seven suns. I stood on the porch of my house leaning against the railing. My left leg, the one rebuilt with titanium and grit after the serious conflict, was aching a bit in the morning dampness, but it was a familiar grounding pain. I was 43 years old, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel a day over 100. A heavy, rhythmic panting preceded a wet nose pressing against my hand. "Down, Buster," I muttered, scratching the ears of the massive, golden-furred retriever that Sledge had found for me on a Terran trade vessel. The dog was a walking disaster of shed hair and enthusiasm, and he was, without a doubt, the smartest thing in the house. "He wants his walk, Vane. You're being a bottleneck in his schedule." Larea stepped out onto the porch carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. She looked different. Her pale purple skin was tanned from hours spent in the sun, and she wore a simple sleeveless dress that showed the faint, silver-gray scars on her arms from the night the architect fell. She didn't look like an empress. She looked like a woman who had spent the morning arguing with a gardening committee about the proper placement of bluebells. "He can wait 5 minutes," I said, taking the mug. "The suns are just getting over the ridge." We stood there in silence, watching the indigo sky bleed into a pale, dusty gold. In the distance, the city was waking up. I could see the smoke rising from the communal kitchens, hear the distant ringing of a school bell, and see the first transports heading out to the grain fields. It was a world built on the ground by people who were learning that being separate was the only way to truly be together. The loom was still there, in a way. The ethos were still telepathic, but it was different now. They had learned to use the hush, a series of mental exercises Larea and the Academy had developed to help people build their own internal walls. Privacy was no longer a void, it was a right. And for those who struggled, the citywide dampening field, a gentle version of the technology I had once embodied, provided a baseline of peace. "Vane," Larea said, her voice soft in the morning air, "do you ever miss the spire? The way everything felt so certain?" "Not for a second," I said. "Certainty is overrated. I prefer the surprises." "Archon Varric's trial ended yesterday," she said, looking out at the horizon. "Life exile in the deep crust mines. He'll spend the rest of his days in the one place where his voice won't carry." "Justice has a funny way of finding the right seller," I said. We sat down in the wooden chairs I'd spent the last month building. They were slightly lopsided, but they held our weight. Buster settled between us, his chin resting on my boot. "The Terran ambassador's coming today," Larea reminded me. "He wants to discuss the new trade treaty, and he wants to meet the man who zero-opted the Ethel Empire. Tell him I'm busy. Tell him I'm a civilian with a dog and a very demanding garden. He won't believe you. Nobody ever does." I took a sip of my tea and let the quiet wash over me. It was strange to think back to that day in the council chamber, 12 years of service ending with a blue signature. I had thought my life was over. I had thought I was a tool that had finally been broken. I hadn't realized that I was just being sharpened. I looked at Larea. She was watching a pair of birds nesting in the eaves of the porch. She didn't need me to block the world for her anymore. She had her own walls, her own strength, her own silence, but she still chose to sit here, with me, in the cold morning air. That was the lesson I'd been trying to learn for 4 decades. Being an anchor isn't about the weight you carry. It's about the person you're holding on to. It's not a burden, it's a choice. And every day we woke up in this house, we were choosing each other all over again, without the help of a psychic bond or a royal decree. I reached over and took her hand. Her skin was warm, vibrant, and perfectly, wonderfully quiet. 12 years, I murmured. +1, she corrected, smiling. +1, I agreed. The 7 suns finally cleared the ridge, flooding the valley with a brilliant, golden light. The city of New Athalas sparkled in the distance, a world of individuals building a future out of the fragments of a hive. There would be more challenges, more disasters, more noise. But as I sat there on my lopsided chair, with my dog at my feet and the woman I loved by my side, I knew we were ready. The void was gone. In its place, there was just life, and that was more than enough. I spent 20 years as a soldier and 12 years as a ghost. For most of that time, I believed that my value was measured by what I could withstand, how much noise I could swallow, how much pain I could bury, how much of myself I could erase to make room for someone else's peace. I thought of myself as a specialized piece of equipment, a biological baffle designed to absorb the psychic exhaust of an empire. I lived in a 12-year winter of my own making, convinced that if I ever let the cold out, I'd shatter the only thing I cared about. But sitting here on this porch, I realize how wrong I was. You don't save someone by becoming their shadow. You save them by being their light. Freedom isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to choose which voices you listen to. Larea didn't need a void. She needed a witness. She needed someone to see her as an individual, not a frequency. Humanity has always been a race of individuals, messy and discordant and loud. We clash and we break and we fail, but we do it with our own hands and our own hearts. That's our greatest strength. We aren't a harmony, we're a conversation. And a conversation only works if you're willing to be heard as much as you're willing to listen. I'm no longer an anchor sitting in the mud. I'm just a man walking on the ground. And for the first time in 43 years, I can finally hear my own voice in the quiet. It's not perfect, and it's a little bit tired, but it's mine. And that is the only sanctuary I'll ever need. I spent over a decade holding back a world's worth of noise just so one person didn't have to suffer alone, and in the end, it was my own silence that almost broke me. I wonder, in your own life, what is the weight you've been carrying for someone else? Are you staying silent to protect them? Or are you just afraid of what happens if you finally speak your truth? What would it feel like to let someone else be your anchor for a change? I looked at the silver pin on the table, the old Ranger eagle I'd reclaimed from the ruins. I didn't put it back on my collar. Instead, I handed it to Larea, and she pinned it to her gardening apron with a wink. We walked down the steps of the porch together, heading into the bright, noisy, and beautiful unknown.